Hanımlar ve beyler, hepinize saygı ve sevgilerimizi sunuyoruz. Bugün 13 Mayıs 2025 ve TÜREB ile Yeşil Deniz'in yeni bir bölümüyle karşınızdayız. TÜREB olarak Türkiye'nin deniz üstü rüzgar enerjisi potansiyeline dair farkındalığı arttırmak ve belki de Türkiye'nin Avrupa rüzgar enerjisi tedarik zincirine entegrasyonunu hızlandırmak için çalışmalar yürütüyoruz. Türkiye'nin offshore rüzgar enerjisi sektörüne gelecekte karşılaşabileceği fırsat ve zorlukları da dünya çapında uzmanlık kazanmış değerli konuklarımızla irdeliyoruz. Bugün Jan De Nul'ün Ticari Deniz Üstü Rüzgar Enerjisi Başkanı Sayın Bart Willems ile beraberiz. Kendisini ağırlayacağız. Kendisi dünya çapındaki devasa deniz üstü rüzgar projelerinin planlamasından ve uygulanmasından sorumlu olarak Jan De Nul'ün başarı hikayelerini bizimle paylaşacak. Türkiye olarak kıyılarımızın rüzgar potansiyelini keşfetmenin yanı sıra Türkiye'nin deniz üstü rüzgar tedarik zinciri, Türkiye'de deniz üstü rüzgar tedarik zincirini oluşturmak için de çalışmalar yürütüyoruz. Bugünkü sohbetimizde dediğim gibi Jan De Nul'ün küresel deneyiminden dersler çıkarmaya gayret edeceğiz. Teknolojik yenilikler ve yeni uygulamaları konuşacağız. Ve tabii ki Türkiye'nin deniz üstü alanındaki yükselen potansiyeli üzerine de birkaç sorumuz olacak. Sözlerime son vermeden önce tüm sorularınızı not almanızı ve yorum bölümüne bırakmanızı rica ediyorum. Bunları panelin sonunda katılımcımıza yönelteceğim. Şimdi hızlıca size Bart Willems'i de tanıtacağım. Bart Willems, Kasım 2021'den bu yana Jan De Nul grubunda Ticari Deniz Üstü Rüzgar Enerjisi Başkanı olarak görev yapıyor. Bu rolde küresel ölçekli deniz üstü rüzgar enerji projeleri için ticari stratejileri, müşteri ilişkilerini ve sözleşme müzakerelerini yönetmektedir. Bundan önce 2019-2020 arasında kıdemli ticari müdür ve 2017-2019 arasında ticari müdür olarak yine Jan De Nul'de çalışmış. Jan De Nul'e katılmadan önce de MPI Offshore'da ticari müdür olarak görev yapmış. Rüzgar türbünü montaj gemilerinin kiralanması ve Ion, Vattenfall, RWE, Iberdrola gibi ana müşteri sözleşmelerinin yönetiminden sorumlu. Programın her zaman olduğu gibi programın giriş ve kapanış bölümlerini iki dilde yapıyoruz. Geri kalan içerik tamamen İngilizce olacak. Ladies and gentlemen, we extend our warmest regards to all of you today. It's May 13th, 2025, and we are back with the new episode of Power of the Wind, Offshore Wind Energy Insights. As TÜREB, our mission is to raise awareness of Turkey's offshore wind energy potential and accelerating the integration of Turkish industry to the European offshore wind supply chain. It's my great pleasure today to host Mr. Bart Willems, Head of Commercial Offshore Wind at Jan De Nul Group, with a portfolio of some of the world's largest offshore wind projects. He will share his expertise and his company's best practices, technological innovations, and lessons they have learned throughout the last century. Here in Turkey, we stand on the threshold of unlocking our coastal wind resources and advancing our energy transition. Today's discussion will cover key takeaways from Jan De Nul, Jan De Nul's experience, cutting-edge technologies and industry best practices, Turkey's emerging offshore potential. Please feel free to note down your questions and put them in the comments, and I can forward those to my guest at the end. Without further ado, please allow me also introduce Mr. Bart Willems. Bart Willems is Head of Commercial Offshore Wind at Jan De Nul Group since November 2021, where he leads commercial strategy, client relationships, and contract negotiations for global offshore wind projects. Prior to this, he served as Senior Commercial Manager and Commercial Manager at Jan De Nul. Before joining Jan De Nul, he was Commercial Manager at MPI Offshore, chartering wind turbine installation vessels and managing key clients' contracts such as Ion, Vattenfall, RWE, and Iberdrola. And now I can welcome my guest, Bart. Thank you very much for joining us today. Welcome.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
My first question will be about Jan De Nul's key role in offshore wind projects worldwide. Can you give us an overview of your experience in offshore wind farm construction and wind turbine installation?
Yes, no problem. But allow me to start with a few slides that we've prepared. The first one being a little of an overview of what Jan De Nul as a company does for people who don't know us that well. We like to call ourselves world builders. What does that mean? It means that we try to shape water, land, and energy. So in 4 segments of our company, we try to make a difference. 4 segments which are named offshore energy on the one side and dredging solutions on the other, and some smaller segments, construction projects and planetary development, which has to do with soil remediation of polluted and contaminated soils. We tend to say that we run on engineering power. We have a lot of engineers in the company. We are an offshore contractor in that respect, which is financially strong and which we believe we are a safety leader in the industry. But we also try to be innovative and work in a sustainable manner. We do this not alone. We do this together with about 9,000 can-do colleagues. And we try to engineer solutions for the big challenges of our time, which are the energy transition, like you referenced, the traffic congestion, port congestions, and remediating contaminated sites in all over the world. Just to give you a little outlook on how big we are, last year our turnover was about 2.9 billion euros. Which suggests that we are quite a substantial partner. We are working all over the world, and here I've just indicated some of the projects that we have done in 2024 that are related to offshore energy. But before I go there, we have also worked in Turkey in historic moments before, and that was mainly not in offshore energy, but in the dredging solutions department. For example, we've been involved in the sand supply projects for the Istanbul airport in 2018 and 2023. But also we've been involved in capital dredging projects in ports like Mersin, Filios, and Yolova. And projects like the Akuyu NPP, where we did some rock bedding and rock protection for water intakes and outfalls. I would like to highlight one project in Turkey, which we were involved in even last year, where we were active on the Sakarya project, which was a project protecting underwater pipelines with rock protection, where we are quite proud to have achieved a world record with a new record water depth of 1,200 meters, where we installed rock on that depth, which was a first in the world, and therefore also a first for Turkey. So well done for both us and your country, of course. You can see here the offshore energy project we've done in 2024. All over the world, with a main focus on Europe. We've been involved in the major projects in Europe that were going on last year. I've highlighted 4 of the projects here, Dogger Bank A, B, and C, which was done for developer SSE and Equinor, where we are installing 3.6 gigawatts of 1.2 gigawatts times 3 of GE turbines. They are the 12 and 13 megawatts, so the biggest at this moment, and it's at this moment the largest offshore wind farm under construction. There we were responsible for installation of the filter and armor rock installation for these locations. We also did some dredging services, and we are currently doing the installation of the turbines themselves. Then maybe another project which we successfully finalized last year was the Godewind 3 and Borkum Rivergrund 3 project, which is another segment where we installed the foundations for these 2 projects. So in total 106 monopiles that were installed and 1 offshore substation, also including scour protection works and cable protection system stabilization works. We finished this project in 2024 successfully and are quite proud of that as well. We are also active in the Middle East. Here is an example of the Lightning project, where we worked for a consortium of big big developers, and where we are installing the HVDC cable and the protection for it for between the mainland and some of the oil producing islands, where we approximately installed 1,000 kilometers of HV power cable, which is quite a substantial amount of work, as you can imagine. And then maybe a last highlight is the West White Rose projects in Canada, where you can see a beautiful structure which was weighing about 210,000 tons. It needed to be floated out of the construction yard, and in order to do that, we needed to trench a canal for the structure to go through. Like you can see, we needed to trench it up to 18-meter water depth, and the dredging volume speaks for itself. More than 2 million cubic meters net of soil that was moved in order to get that done. So that's a bit of the overview, and that's it for the presentation of what we do. As you can see, in offshore wind and offshore energy, we are quite active. I've only given you some examples from last year, but we've been active for at least a decade or more, and being involved in most of the important offshore wind programs all over the world.
Thank you, Bart. That is very impressive presentation. Actually, yes, we are at the ground zero right now in Turkey, but we want to achieve 5 gigawatts offshore wind installed power by 2035. And to achieve that, we need to be very careful. So from your perspective, what are the critical factors that determine the success of an offshore wind farm construction project?
Yeah, that's immediately a very complex question, because there's no easy answer to it, of course, Ufuk, but I think there are a few elements which I can raise. First and foremost, and I think the most important part for everybody or anybody who is looking at developing offshore wind and making it a success is the need for sufficient and accurate data. Data is one of the things that is detrimental for a successful offshore wind project. And when I speak of data, I mean data about soil, data about weather, data about wind, data about the met-ocean information, and having that data and analyzing it in a proper way will allow people to come to a commercially viable project. That being the most important in my personal view. The second, which is sometimes a little bit more out of our control, is the law, the regulation, and electricity prices that need to be established in a very transparent and very positive way. Without a proper judicial framework or the relevant regulation in place, I think the success factor of an offshore wind farm will be almost zero. The market must be willing to invest, and therefore the local regulation and electricity market must be attractive. Yeah. Maybe a last point that is certainly relevant and where we would like to stress the importance of is the collaboration in the industry between local partners, but also experienced developers, experienced engineers, experienced consultants, the whole supply chain, and the experience of the people involved is very important. Trying to do things and reinvent the hot water is probably not the best idea. There is a lot of well-known knowledge in the world about offshore wind, and as an emerging market, it is a wise advice to start tapping into that and learning from that, and collaborate together in order to get certainly the first projects to a positive success.
Thank you. I agree with you. As you know, as you already did some projects in Turkey, not offshore wind related, but still offshore construction related, we have a very challenging geography. Like, we are in active seismic zones, we have very steep slopes under the water, and then also it gets quite deep, 40, 50 meters on average for nearshore wind farms even. So what innovative construction techniques or technologies is Jan De Nul implementing to improve efficiency and reduce costs for challenging environments?
Yeah, when we look at this question, I think the most important part is that the construction of offshore wind farms should be looked at as a sort of industrialized process. Yeah, I mean, yes, there are challenges, but offshore wind, in order to become successful and in order to become relevant in the mix of energy in the world, needs to be looked at from a point of a more industrialized process. And for that, as an offshore constructor and contractor, we of course have tools that are relevant for contributing to that. And our tools are the vessels and the equipment that come along with it. I think most of the innovative techniques have already come in the past, but with all the aspects of offshore wind growing significantly every single year by having new concepts and new ideas going bigger and hopefully better, that also means that our vessels need to adapt to that. And any new vessel that we build, and we've just delivered a few new heavy lift vessels over the past couple of years, every new vessel is an innovation. And we try to make it future proof, although that is very hard to do in this day and age. But in that building of new vessels, we try to accommodate, of course, also new innovations, new techniques, in order to be ready for what the future brings and the requirements from the social aspects of this business. I can give you some examples. With the new vessels, we, for example, take into account a lot of the environmental concerns that are playing a role in the current market. So our vessels are equipped with what we call ULEF technology, ultra low emission vessels, which takes away a lot of the pollution that is created by vessels in general in the maritime business. And for example, also our two new cable-lay vessels. We've ordered two new cable-lay vessels, which will be delivered in 2026, will be able to run on dual fuel, including methanol, which is, of course, a lot better for the environment than the exhaust of diesel and other heavy fuels. On top of that, we try to innovate as much as we can by also being involved in joint industry projects, what we call JIPs. And we see a lot of attention going recently to specific subjects like noise mitigation. Noise mitigation in Europe is becoming a very big issue, specifically in Germany and the Netherlands. But it will be all over the world, where we are joining forces with partners within the industry to find solutions on how to deal with noise pollution subsea. And we also try to find solutions to other challenges like nature inclusive designs, where we try to make the impact of offshore wind into the natural habitat of animals so minimal as possible. And there is a lot of innovation that is possible and that we're looking at. And finally, maybe, yes, of course, and it speaks for itself, we have a lot of collaborations with universities all over the world. Innovation comes from new insights and from new generations, and the new generations are all being trained at universities and other schools. So our collaboration with these schools is quite close, and hopefully also trying to find some good workforce out of that with new ideas and fresh ideas. So that's what we try to do when it comes down to our vessels and the innovative part of it.
Thank you. Yes, attracting new talent is also another aspect why we should have close ties with the academy on
Yes.
top of the innovation. Yes. You mentioned about the importance of soil investigation and metocean. And then how do seabed conditions and geotechnical challenges impact the installation of offshore wind farms? And how can these risks be mitigated? I just want to remind you once again, all the projects that are being developed right now in nearshore Turkiye is located in the seismic active zone. So A lot of earthquakes are happening all the time.
Thank you for reminding me on that, Ufuk, but I had it already in my preparation. So it's indeed a challenge. But next to that, and I'll come to that later. But next to that, I think the geophysical conditions of picking the location for offshore wind farms is the most detrimental part of an offshore wind project. It will impact the entire project from beginning to end, and some elements, of course, speak again for themselves. The first one coming to mind, of course, is the foundation design and the selection of the foundation type. It will all depend on the subsoil, what type of foundation, whether we are looking at monopiles, jackets, suction caissons, or anything else. What type of soil is present, and what is the best type of foundation that is suited for that specific location, depending on the data that we have. And again, I come back to the data, and the soil data is very important. That is the beginning, because the foundation design is a big part of the start of the project. When we go down to the installation part, yes, it's also important to know what type of soil we're dealing with, because still in certain parts of the installation sequence, we will need jackup vessels. And jackup vessels to install the turbines need to be able to jack down on certain types of soil, and that brings a lot of challenges. I can give you an example of that, where in France, some of the projects were based on a very rocky and hard soil, where it was impossible for our jackup vessels to jack up without any damage to the spud cans. And we came up with an inventive solution of cutting the rock into very small pieces, like making it a sort of gravel bed on the places where the jackup could go. Of course, I don't have to tell you that's a complex activity, but also a cost and time-consuming activity. And that all implies that everybody needs to think well about what that soil condition might have as an impact later. Also, when you go down to the further steps, cable laying, which is also a big part of the project. When you look at offshore wind, soil will determine whether your cables can be trenched or whether they need to be put on the seabed and protected with rock layers. So also there's a big impact, and subsea mobility, sand waves that play a role, that maybe can expose cables or need seabed leveling before you install cables, is a very impactful element and has to be taken into account. And then, of course, like you indicated yourself, the earthquakes. I know that Turkey is prone to earthquakes. You are not the only country in the world, and it should not prohibit you from looking at offshore wind. We have personally had hands-on experience with seismic sensitive projects in Taiwan, where there is also a lot of seismic activity, but with the correct preparation and the right regard for safety, it should not be a prohibiting factor for offshore wind. It just needs a little bit more attention, a little bit more research, a little bit more data. Again, here I come with my data, but it is certainly not a game stopper in that respect, but it needs to be taken into account. And when it comes down to mitigation, again, we come to the fact that it all comes down to comprehensive and extensive site investigation. And if I can bring one message to this audience here, is that please do not save any money on the investigation part. The money you spend on a good investigation and a good soil data set will save you a multiple amount of money later down the project, and that is something I really want to stress in this talk.
Yeah, it's also important for the developers and investors, as you said, Bart, because if you don't have data as a contractor, you would just assume the worst case based on your experience in the past, and that will increase the budget to offer you propose them. So the more data they collect, the better quotations offers they will get from contractors, and maybe even
the more detailed preparation that can be done, and the less surprises you will have at the end, and that is completely correct, Ufuk.
Exactly. During your speech, you said bigger is the better. That's what they think in the offshore wind industry. Wind turbines are getting large, as you said. Now you're installing 12, 13 megawatts now, and Vestas has commissioned 15 megawatts recently. We are not talking about China even. If you go there, we will see 20 megawatts, wind turbine generators. What challenges does this pose for installation, and how is Jan De Nul adapting its fleet and methodologies to accommodate these challenges? Or is it even possible to adapt so fast to these growing giants every other year?
You gave me a good point of attack here, Ufuk, because yes, it's one of the big challenges that we are facing as marine contractors. So thank you for that pass. Maybe to go back in history a little bit. In the industry, we started out with installing 3 to 5 megawatt turbines. When I was starting in this industry about 17 years ago, 3 to 5 megawatt turbines were the bigger size turbines. One can imagine that it seems ages ago, but yes, that's the reality. And we quickly evolved to the 6 to 10 megawatt turbines. And like you said now, and like I said in my introduction, on Dogger Bank, for example, we are installing the 12 megawatt turbines. And for the 12 to 15 megawatts, there was a need for a new type of vessel. And the new type of vessel and the investments that needed to be done for that have been done by Jan De Nul, but also by our competitors. And the jackup size of that vessel was significantly bigger than what was in the market before. Now, when the market moves to bigger turbines, and you referenced the 20 megawatt, 24, 23 megawatt turbine, depending on which country or area in the world you're looking at, we can probably, with our current vessel, the Voltaire, we can still adapt our crane height in order to be able to service those heights. But you have to take into account that bigger is not always better from a perspective of our position. The investment that it takes for a vessel that is capable of installing 12 to 15 megawatt turbines or even 18, 20 megawatt turbines is very significant. It is a huge investment, and with sizes of turbines doubling every 5 to 7 years, you can guess that does not align with an investment strategy of assets of that size. And there lies the challenge on what we need to do. And knowing that doubling that turbine size does not equal the doubling of the installed capacity, because in Europe, I think if we look across the board, the last 10 years, the average of the installed capacity in Europe is around 3 gigawatts per year, depending on which country you will look at. But bigger is not always better, also in a sense from a commercial point of view. Yes, they will be able to get more energy and create more energy and more input or output in this case, but the supply chain surrounding that bigger turbine also becomes more complex and more expensive. You need more or heavier and more different foundations. You need new fabrication lines, you need new vessels, new cables of getting that bigger energy to shore. And I think we are at Europe at a turning point now where we are really realizing that we should stop this race to the top, and we should somehow build in a resting pause where we come more to standardization rather than innovation. And the standardization will hopefully bring some rest into the market, but will allow for more efficiency rather than innovative ideas, which bring investment decisions which are no more bearable for people and contractors like ourselves or our competitors.
Yeah, Vestas announced that they're going to halt the race for a while and stick to their 15 megawatt turbine, but Siemens is trying to still fight back with the Chinese OEMs, it seems. Let's see how it will be.
It is a bit of a difficult choice, because innovation, certainly for these OEMs, is also meaning investment sums and a lot of money on the line. And I think the end target of any company, a healthy company, is to write black ink. And with these constant innovations, it's very hard to write black ink in a sustainable way. And then a choice needs to be made. So we welcome that decision from Vestas. We hope that others will follow, but we will never know. As in offshore wind, nothing is certain over the long term.
Yeah, that's also same for the onshore wind, though. I mean, I haven't, for the last 10 years, I haven't seen any OEM which is profiting more than 2% in a year. So it's always a challenge profiting for
Yes,
these.
indeed. So maybe it's time to look at standardization and optimizing output rather than growing. And I might come to it later, but I think there are examples enough in the general mondial industry that has shown that standardization is not always a step back. In containerized transport, I think we all now are well aware of our 20-foot containers and how we have dealt with that in the past. But that also took 30 years to mature in the minds of people. But we all agree that that was the right thing to do. And I think in offshore wind, that time is now ready to start thinking about those things as well.
We'll see. I hope you're right. So what about the timeline? So we, in Türkiye, we have to install our first gigawatt by 2031. If you want to stick to the goal we have for the 2035. And wherever I go and ask the contractors, construction companies, like how is the pipeline, how is the workload, they said they are fully booked for the next 5 years, 6 years. That's what I heard from Jan De Nul as well. So what's happening in the timeline? Are you getting faster? Are you innovating in that sense as well to install more? Do more on offshore wind?
Well, of course, we're trying to do everything better and faster as a good contractor would abide. But I think your question it can be interpreted a little bit twofold, and I will take it from two different angles, if you don't mind. First and foremost, there is the installation timeline that can be defined as the time required from the initiative idea of building a wind farm to the actual production of energy. It's the total timeline between the first, say, soil data analysis towards actually producing power. And the second aspect can be looked at as, okay, the actual installation of the components. How is the timeline evolved in that respect? And I think on both sides, on both definitions, the offshore wind projects are becoming faster and more efficient, with the caveat that is only the case in countries where there is a mature supply chain and where there is streamlined permitting in place. Now, of course, there are also a lot of bottlenecks that prohibit the improvement of timelines, both for the project as for the installation sequence. And some of that has to do with emerging countries that have not had the experience of having quite a pipeline of projects already being installed, sometimes struggle with permitting aspects and grid connection delays. So that are elements that delay projects in general and from the bigger size. From the supply chain side, I think there are a lot of constraints in respect of equipment shortages and delay in projects. Like you said, yes, there are some players in the market that are being preemptive. And the preemptiveness means that they are taking the flight forward and booking tonnage and booking certain elements of the supply chain years in advance. And that being said, there is only so much that can be done with a certain amount of equipment, whether it be vessels or factories or anything available. Now, the good news is that we are constantly expanding as a business, and I think that there are opportunities there. But on the other hand, we also see that the ambitious goals of certain countries are too ambitious, and trying to achieve those ambitions is, in theory, impossible. And therefore, there will be an automatic shift of these ambitions towards the back end of this decade at least, because timelines for producing new either factories or vessels also takes time. New vessel takes about 3.5 to 4.5 years to build. So it's not a quick fix, certainly. And maybe one last aspect that I want to highlight in that is that even though we might get better at operations, we might get better at permitting, and things will go faster, there is one thing that we do not have control over, and that are weather windows, weather conditions. We need good weather conditions to install, and how fast we might be able to get, we are still dependent on what is called Mother Nature. And Mother Nature has sometimes very strange ways of telling us to calm down. And that's an element which we don't have control over. And that is a big part of what the programming and planning within an offshore wind project is, even not only for the components, but also from a general perspective, because it impacts all aspects of the installation sequence. And to come back and sound like a broken record maybe, but larger components and the ever-growing segment of innovation does not help speed. When there are new turbines, there are new installation techniques, there need to be new vessels, and every time when you talk about something new, there is a learning curve. And let's just use the learning curve that we've already had, and therefore optimize installation sequences instead of trying to or having to invent new sequences in respect of new elements and new turbines. So standardization is once again the key word in this question, Ufuk.
Thank you. Let's focus on Turkey. We are at the early stages of development. Based on your global experience, what are the key steps we should take to build a strong offshore wind industry?
A good one, a very good one. And I think we can answer that in a very simple sentence, Ufuk, but it's a very important sentence. Set up a consistent master plan with a clear and a realistic goal, or goals in multiple, and stick to the plan. Make a good plan, a robust plan, and stick to the plan. That is the golden rule for any emerging country. And like we said before, the three elements that I mentioned before are still relevant. Site investigation, find your good locations, have your data there, and make sure that your locations are the best placed for the energy production. Good and attractive legislation. That is something that will make developers very excited about your market. And if you have a chance, also make sure that you have a good electricity market, or at least a mechanism which is attractive to people who will produce the energy. And prepare your necessary facilities, also onshore, like grid connection and marshalling port. Prepare them very well before you start, so that there are no unexpected surprises there. And then the conclusion is that developers like a reliable country to work in. And a reliable country means a country that sticks to the plan. And then the circle is round. There are some good examples out there, and don't be afraid to look across the borders. The Netherlands in Europe certainly was one of the front runners, and the way it was done right, with about 1.4 gigawatts per year. They are on track of being a good example. And for emerging countries, I think a very good example in the APAC region is Taiwan. They started from nothing, but took into account, with some lessons learned, the points that I raised earlier. They've had good site investigations, they have a good legislation in place, and they prepared their onshore facilities in a way that it was very, very attractive to developers. And they are now building about 1.5 gigawatts per year, which is successful, and they're doing it quite well and still expanding. So that's a bit my message in respect of Turkey being in the early stages, but still having the chance to take some elements into account which might bring them success, and which I'm sure that will get them success if they follow these recommendations in the years to come.
You said that Turkey should look out to see and benefit from the experience, and we lack expertise in this field. How do you think we can benefit from international collaboration here?
Well, you say you lack experience. That might be true in respect of offshore wind, but I think you have also a lot of know-how as a country from other complex and strategical projects that you've done in the past. And offshore wind is not that different. I mean, when I think of Turkey, and certainly from my perspective, of course, I see projects like the Sakarya project, which I've already discussed. I see the Eurasia Tunnel, the Bosporus bridges. These are all very complex and very interesting strategical projects, which you've all successfully brought to completion. And offshore wind might be one of these new ones, but I think you have the advantage, first and foremost, of being very close to Europe. You don't have the challenges that other emerging countries like the APAC region or even the USA have, where it will mean that mobilization for equipment either towards your country or from your country to Europe will be cheaper and easier than some of the other regions. But the fact that you have a local supply chain, which is already quite established from an industry point of view, and I'm thinking about, of course, steel production and etc. There is a need for even international partners to work with local companies. That is, even in the offshore wind industry, a requirement. I think a good example there is Poland. Poland is moving forward very quickly, but did in a way that local players teamed up with international players, not because of the fact that the international players wanted to have a partner there by definition, but it was almost a requirement because of the local knowledge that you needed, and in order to get that link to local industry. Local industry will play a big part, and I think Turkey has a robust supply chain with plenty of growth potential, which will be beneficial for both domestic offshore wind markets, so to grow your first project successfully, and to become an international player in the offshore wind market, because the fact that you have an industry there that is part of the supply chain worldwide should be highlighted. And therefore, my message to the audience here is make sure that offshore wind, and certainly the first projects in Turkey, are a success. And if they are a success, then please use that success as a showcase to boost your local supply chain on the international stage. That will be an opportunity that will bring a lot of benefit to the industry. But indeed, for the first projects, probably, and maybe later on, it will be a combination of collaboration with industry players that have the knowledge and the experience. But I think some obvious local suppliers will be part of that journey for sure. Ufuk.
I want to still stay on this topic about like local supply chain. We have a very strong supply chain for onshore wind industry, and we have a very strong supply chain for even shipbuilding, and we have contractors that are capable of doing construction offshore, yes. But in offshore wind specifically, how do you think we can integrate Türkiye better to the European offshore wind supply chain?
Well, I think first thing that we need to realize is that offshore wind projects and developers that are involved sometimes underestimated. But in average, I think there's about 10 countries or 10 nationalities that are involved on a total offshore wind project. So offshore wind is a very international activity, and we know that in the current years, a lot of emphasis have been made on local content in certain countries, but I want to counter that a little bit, because local content is good, of course. It will create local jobs and it will create a local industry, but because of the fact that it's so international, there is a need to still have that international aspect to it. And I think in Turkey, there will be obvious players within the domestic market that will be preferred suppliers in the supply chain because of the experience. You talked about shipbuilding, steel construction, foundation construction and even blade construction for onshore wind. And if you can do it on onshore wind, there should be nothing that stops you in doing the same for offshore wind. And I think there lies the opportunity to showcase again that experience. But for local companies, when you look at international connections and international opportunities, make sure that the local companies that are involved and that are really going for that involvement on a higher level, make sure that they realize that you need the good companies with a competitive edge, but companies that think broader than the Turkish market only. You need to be able to look internationally in order to do it. There has been, I think, never a supply chain partner that has survived by only providing for a local market in offshore wind. It needs to be bigger than that, and the opportunities are there. You have the experience, you have the knowledge. I think the only thing you're lacking is showcasing maybe a little bit on your domestic market. But once you do that, I think there will be plenty of opportunities to bring it to a worldwide scale.
Yeah, for the supply chain, a bottleneck and challenges like bottlenecks are also opportunities for countries like Turkey to become the part of the existing supply chains. What do you think biggest bottlenecks or challenges facing offshore wind construction, and how do you see the industry overcoming them?
We are in the phase of offshore wind where we tend to identify more bottlenecks than we would like to, in all honesty. But there are bottlenecks indeed, but any challenge can be overcome. So we always like to think of it as in a more positive way. Now, there's no doubt about the fact that there are some elements that play a big role. Inflation and interest rates over the past years have been completely off the hook, and they changed in a very short period, which made some of the projects economically not viable anymore. So good advice there, good indexation mechanism and contractual agreements in respect of indexation mechanisms is primordial. Supply chain wise, of course, there's the availability of vessels. Vessels are very hard to come by at the moment. There is an over demand on vessels. Depending on who you talk to, it will kick in either this year or as from 2030, but we all agree that there will be an over demand. And combine that with the unrealistic expectations that some of the countries put forward, then you are almost predicting a bottleneck there. So we are a bit in dubio on the realism of these targets. But if we come to more realistic targets, we all need to realize that all participants, ranging from the developer to the smallest part of the supply chain, needs to have an outlook for a sustainable business. Not just a lot of work for the next 4 years, for the next 3 years, it needs to be bigger than that. Investment horizons for this industry are longer than 5 years. We need to talk about pipelines and outlooks that are steady and that are long-term, and I'm talking about 10 years of long or longer. And therefore, again, and I already came to it before, standardization is what we are looking for. Standardization is what we think will bring a little bit more rest to the market and will be able to take away a lot of these bottlenecks because of the stress there is on the supply chain to still have to cope with these new innovative, bigger turbines, bigger machines, bigger weights. And I already touched upon the example that I gave. The container standardization is a perfect example. It took us from the 60s to the 90s to come to it, but we are there now. And that brings you to maybe the most difficult question. I can shout here about standardization as much as I want, but the question is, how will we achieve it? How will we come to standardization? And there, the big conundrum is, will we have the market take care of it itself, or will we need some government interference in order to put some regulation in place that brings standardization to the market? I'm not going to express any point of view in that respect. I will leave it to the listeners and to the people who are in the seminar to think about it themselves. But it's a big thing to think about. It's what will the future bring. There are bottlenecks, but we like to look at the glass half full. Certainly in our business and our industry, setbacks might be the step up to some improvements and lessons learned. So we are always looking at it positively.
What about the innovations that you foresee in the next 5-10 years in your industry, other than standardization, let's say? That's not innovation.
Can you repeat the question, please?
What are the innovations that you foresee in the next 5-10 years when it comes to the construction and installation offshore?
If there's one thing that we've learned in our industry is that it's not good to try to look ahead too far. I always give the example of when I started in this business, the heaviest monopile that was installed was about 300 tons, and 300 tons was easily installed with a vessel that had a 600-ton crane. And with that 600-ton crane, we would be able to service the offshore wind industry for at least 70 years. That was the idea about 15 years or 20 years ago. Well, we all know that it has not turned out the way everybody thought, and we are now looking at foundations of 2,500 tons, 3,500 tons. It's crazy. So if there's one thing we've learned, is not to try to look ahead that much. Now, because the mistake you can make is trying to look ahead, have a view, believe your view is the correct one, and then we've seen a lot of parties making the mistake of turning the wrong page at the wrong time. So with the detrimental outcome. But standardization, I should not repeat it, I know, but with that comes the innovation about increasing efficiency. Increasing the efficiency with the tools that we have should be the innovation where we are looking at. And not only that, but also with that, the interconnectivity that is becoming a big part of this industry. And certainly, I think from the point of view that interconnectivity will be the new kind of way to get electricity from one point to the other. And when you compare that with what is currently there, I think there's a lot more to explore on what the possibilities are. Now, when you talk about innovation, again, I think efficiency is key, but there is no way we can go around the hot potato of floating offshore wind. Floating offshore wind is a big innovation which is currently taking place. People are saying floating offshore wind is coming and is around the corner. It's been around the corner for 10 years now, and I haven't seen its nose yet. Well, a little bit of it, but not much. And the question is, do we want to keep diversifying our focus on all these new things while there is so much more to innovate in the existing technology? And when you come to that, I think we should be very focused on what we do well and what we do good, and try to improve that. And then I can give you some examples of innovation and techniques, but there are plenty to name. But I think that is the main focus. Increase efficiency, have a look how we can increase interconnectivity and get energy from one continent to another or one country to another, being able to diversify a little bit. And if there are new technologies, make sure that we test them, that they are well proven, and that we don't start predicting things which we cannot make true. That is the good message here.
Thank you. My final question is again for Turkey. Do you have any final advice that you would give?
There's always advice, Ufuk. Certainly, in whether it's the right advice, I don't know. But I think, as a closing remark, and maybe recapturing a little bit of what we said today, for the developers that are looking looking at Turkey as an emerging market, look at experienced partners. So if there's any Turkish developers, look at the outside to team up with experienced partners. If you really want to become successful in the supply chain as a fabricator or as a supplier, look at the international market. Looking only at the home market is quite dangerous to do. So look beyond the borders. And as an industry in Turkey, but that goes for every emerging country, lobby for a solid master plan from the government. A solid master plan is something that is detrimental to the success of what is coming. And look at what has worked elsewhere. Look at the successes, and try not to reinvent the hot water. But when it comes down to Turkey specifically, one advice: we are an industry which has been growing over the last decades quite substantially. We've had a very steep learning curve. But whatever you do, please do it safe and to the highest standards. It is detrimental in our sector. It is something which is very important, which safety of all the people involved in the supply chain is the most detrimental part. Everybody should be able to go safely to work and back home. And please take that into account when you look at standards and looking forward. But we believe that Turkey is ready for it. We have seen Turkey being successful in a lot of aspects of the industry, and we believe that they are ready for this big leap as well. And of course, we are there to support Turkey in that journey throughout the next coming years. And if there are any questions that would come to my way in order to be able to assist, I'm more than glad to answer them and see what we can do.
Thank you, Bart. I'm looking at the questions that we have received from our viewers, guests, but we have already exceeded our time, so I'm just going to pick two. There is one that is about floating. You've already answered that. I can skip that. Someone asked, how do you think radar interactions with offshore wind projects will play out in the long run?
That is quite a technical question, I must be honest. I mean, I wouldn't be able to answer that question in detail, but I know it's been done elsewhere in respect of locations of offshore wind farms that have been close to airports, for example. There are some projects in Denmark which are quite close to Copenhagen, which have been approved, and I know that there was a lot of challenges in respect of radar interaction, and I know that the permits were at the end granted after a lot of conversations with both the air traffic control and the military people in the project, and I think it needs to be flagged, but it can be overcome, and it should be able to go hand in hand. But again, I'm not a technical guy, so I might have to come back to that question if I have some more time to research.
Baba Bagiev is saying, with warm wishes from Azerbaijan. There's a hi from Azerbaijan. Are you doing business there?
Warm wishes back, of course, to the country of Azerbaijan.
Okay. Maybe this could be a last question. One of our viewers are curious about the timeline. How long does it take to install these 15 megawatts, let's say 13 megawatts turbine in a good weather? And what's the cost for an investor developer? How much do you charge? That's simply, let's put it that way.
How much do we charge, or how much is the project going to cost? That's
no,
a big
how much
difference. No, I think the timeline. The timeline is for the 15 megawatt turbines. In depends on the circumstances, of course. Again, but taking into account good weather and good soil, because it all depends on the jacking times. Jacking times means that if you have big leg penetration, so the legs of the jackup vessel that go into the soil, they can go either in deep or shallow. And if they go in very deep, and depending on what type of soil it is, it can take maybe half an hour to 15 hours of jacking time, either going in or going back out. Specifically, going back out is the more crucial part. But if you would take all that into account, being relatively standard, so no extremes in respect of penetration and having good weather, one should be able to have a turbine installed between 1 and 1.5 days per turbine. That is about the timing that is there. But there are a lot of elements that can have an impact on that, and those elements can lie with the contractor, but they can also lie with the developer or with the OEMs. The OEMs are mostly in charge of the installation sequence once the turbines are erected. And also that timing depends on OEM to OEM and on the site-specific elements of it. In respect of costs, I'm not going to name any numbers, of course, here. That would not be relevant and would not benefit anybody here. But the thing I can say is that that things are becoming a little bit more expensive, and that is mainly driven by the fact that these new generation of turbines and equipment and components require a lot of investment, not only from our side, but also investment from other partners in the supply chain. And with all the geopolitical turmoil and the socioeconomic turmoil, things have become, on first sight, maybe a little bit more expensive than before. However, we should again see it from a positive way, and it should be a reason for us to start rethinking how we deal with this market as an industry, not as an individual player like Jan De Nul or an individual developer like Ørsted's Vattenfall or Iberdrola's of this world, but we should get together and see how we can go back to the drawing table and see where we can eliminate the superfluous costs that are currently still sneaking into a lot of these offshore wind projects. And there is room for bettering. There is room for improvement. And I'm quite sure if we all put our noses in the right direction, and we know that offshore energy and specifically offshore wind is the energy of the future, that we will come to a solution which will bring it to very viable and very attractive projects again.
Thank you, Bart. We came to the end of our conversation today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We've come to the end, yet another insightful conversation. I want to thank you, Bart, for sharing vast expertise with us today. A special thank you for the team who helped us organizing this, Jan, İlkin, and Mesut Bey. Let's continue these critical discussions and collaborations to advance the future of offshore wind energy. Have a great day, everyone. Değerli izleyenler, programımızın sonuna geldik. Bart'a teşekkür etmek istiyorum. Engin bilgi birikimini ve firmasının tecrübesini bizimle paylaştığı için bugün. Ayrıca programımızın gerçekleşmesinde emeği geçen TÜREB ofis ekibimize, Ecem Hanım, İlkin ve Mesut Bey'e de teşekkür etmek istiyorum. Katılımınız için size de teşekkürler, sağlıklı günler diliyorum.